Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Okay, here we are continuing the conversation. And I'm leading off just for change because, as Ruth suggested, an idea, can be open to change. And I think that's fabulous. So Ruth, why did you suggest open to change?
Well, obviously, because we're landing on the letter O, and I was like, what is... And I think, in this little mini-series that we're doing, the ABCs of Thriving, it's been such an interesting way of going through the alphabet and just picking these words. And we love words, right? So it's like taking these words and thinking, well, what does thriving look like? Obviously we came at this episode is about O. And I was just thinking, well, first off, I just thought, I love that word open. There's like, what's it, when human beings are open, as opposed to closed. There's just so much there, Tom, to talk about in that word.
Especially when it comes to thriving.
Yeah.
And not just surviving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Closed is all about surviving.
And open as well doesn't necessarily mean that you are all signed up, or it's just open. You're just like the posture of being open is, to me, it's like receptive. You're being receptive or curious or questioning, and then I think the word change is, when I think about, and there's a whole can of worms in that word that we're going to go into in a minute, and so much positivity as well. But I thought, actually, when I think about thriving in today's worlds, or any world, really, being open to change as human beings feels like really central and key to me to thriving. So I just texted you and I was like, hey, how about this? And most of the ideas for this have come from you and been developed as we've had conversations. But I texted you not long ago and just said, what do you think about this for the letter O? And you were interested in that too. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is being open to change. And so let's start off well,
when we were talking earlier, and we always have a pre-conversation too, so that it's not just rambling. It does fit, and it has a trajectory when we do record it. But early on, when we were just sitting and talking, you were talking about change, and we are quite literally in a season of change. It's shifting from winter into spring, and spring has apparently sprung, but we're in Colorado, so you never quite know. But it appears
spring is complex in Colorado. Let's put it that way. If I was spring in Colorado, I'd go and get therapy.
Yes. And so you're approaching the end of a school year with your kids, and there's going to be change in your schedule. And you were talking about that change.
Yeah.
And what do I do with that? And one of the things that really struck me related to open to change and this conversation this morning is that you're trying to navigate that parent time in your kids' lives at the age they are, where what am I doing with summer? What are the kids doing with summer? Because school, not in session, and having enough there that occupies them without it being extraordinarily burdensome, keeping track of everything, and just, or not enough.
Yeah. And
you mentioned that for the first 2 weeks, probably good to go, but then they hit boredom.
Yeah.
And I'm bored.
Netflix becomes another child in the household at that point.
Yes, and boredom is an indication of stagnation.
Yeah.
Things are not changing. So change is life. life is change.
Mm-hmm.
Change just is. And stagnation, no change, that's not beneficial.
Yeah, not at all. And that's what I think I've discovered in these summer times with the children.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you know, in England, kids have 6 weeks holiday there. Here in Colorado, apparently because of the farming,
Mm-hmm.
that's where
That's
it
the
started.
history, which is largely irrelevant now because
I know. It's
Yeah.
12 weeks summer vacation. So I think there's this sense of all the parents we're ready for a break, but then we also sense this kind of like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do for 12 weeks?
I remember
Yeah.
back when my kids were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, and what you just mentioned is an indication of the shift, the change that's happened in the United States that's gone from an agrarian model, and people lived on the farm. And why weren't the kids in school? Because you had to have farm hands, and big families meant workers. And there's so much that's bustling in summertime and so much to be done in the summertime. You needed hands.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't be at school. And yet that model has continued when it's largely irrelevant for the vast majority of the population. And yet it lingers. Why? Because resisting change.
Yeah. And so, for example, in that small example of my kids,
Mm-hmm.
you know, shifting seasons to summertime, and it is fun and all the rest of it, I could be close to it. I could put my head in the sand and just go, I'm just not even thinking about it. I'm going to pretend that is not happening. And that would be awful. That if I did that would no one would be happy for 12 weeks in my household. But the idea of being open to change, to go, okay, it's a new season. So how do I partner with this season, and how can I be influential in that? I think that's what we're talking about here, and that can be applied not just to kids being on summer, but I mean, you know, change is happening all around us, and it can be applied to our individual lives. It can be applied to some of the big changes that are happening on a worldwide level. As human beings, are we open to change? Are we willing to be open to the change that's happening around us and enter into it, as opposed to not entering into it? So but we're kind of already tapping into a few like
Yes.
areas that I'd love us to kind of go a bit deeper into. Have you got any that you want to start us off on?
Oh, yeah.
Go on then.
Because, surprise, homeostasis. Why homeostasis and change? Because all these many little lives that we've been talking about, whether those are the many little lives of kids and where are they and what are they doing, or the many little lives of us in our careers or us in relationships and all of that, that Théophile de Bourdieu used the metaphor of many little lives to express the concept of homeostasis observable in organisms. And there is always change. Change just is. And so whether it's the insect colonies or the colonies of cells inside our own bodies at different seasons and in different situations, that's always happening. There's this constant churning of all those many little lives. And so there is a persistent and dynamic disequilibrium. Equilibrium is everything is balanced. When we were early on, and I was pondering this idea of open to change, I had an image of the Jenga game.
Yeah.
And why did I think of that? Is because that game, and if you're familiar with Jenga, if you're not, but it's a tower of blocks that you build and there's each level is like 3 blocks. And the game, once you construct the tower, is to keep pushing out and pulling out individual blocks. And the idea is that you want to be able to pull out a block and not topple the structure. And the game is try to be the one, because with each block that's removed, it becomes more and more precarious, aka change. And it feels more and more precarious, which for some is a really exciting game, and for others is like, oh no! And you don't want to be the last one to pull a block and change the structure so that it all topples down. And change can feel like that.
Yeah. If
you're in survival mode, and in Jenga, you're surviving, and you want to be the one that survived, not the one that didn't, and it toppled when you pulled the change. You pulled the block and changed something. Change can feel like that. When you're in a survival mentality, change is a threat. Mm-hmm. You want equilibrium. You don't want change, because it's another thing to have to deal with.
And also it's the anticipation. I think for Jenga, it's the anticipation of that block coming down, which we all know is super noisy. And it's like, it shocks you slightly, doesn't it? It's like, ah! And so I think that there's, when you're in survival mode and approaching change, mm-hmm. the anticipation of it being noisy and shocking and disruptive, and that's it. I'm just thinking now of pulling that last Jenga block out, and just like, that's the nervousness, right? Because you're like, am I going to cause this?
Yes. And is this change that's happening in my life going to be that last Jenga block and my tower comes crashing down? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With homeostasis, the renowned French physiologist Claude Bernard asserted in the 19th century that what would later be termed homeostasis by Walter Cannon was the condition for life itself. The fixity of the internal environment is the condition of a free and independent life. But that is change, fundamentally. Dr. Walter Cannon took inspiration from Bernard in his study of the physiology of the human stress response. He is the one who devised the phrase flight or fight, mm-hmm. which my preference would be not flight, but avoid. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to avoid the sensed threat to well-being, whether that's holding still and freezing or running away really fast. Mm-hmm. We're trying to avoid the sensed or perceived threat, and change can be sensed or perceived as a threat.
Yeah.
And it activates the sympathetic nervous system. And then fight, my preference isn't fight, because it connotes fisticuffs and hurtful words and all the rest of that, but fight in the sense of manage. So we're trying to manage the threat. If we can't avoid the threat, then we try to manage the threat. Mm-hmm.
But the point is, with all of those, is that we're perceiving change as a threat.
Exactly.
Which is why we're staying in survival, or staying in fight or flight, or fight and avoid, or what, mm-hmm. Whichever word you want to attribute to those. But the point is, when we're in survival, we see change as a threat rather than this beneficial, dynamic, homeostatic state. Would you say that's correct?
Yes.
Instead of seeing it like that actually brings life and balance and
is life.
Yeah, it is life. When we see it as a threat, something that's coming against us, something that's going to take something from us, something that we're going to lose something, it's going to be the Jenga block that falls down. Then we end up being somewhere in fight or flight with it.
Yes.
And where we're either trying to control it or manage it, or we're avoiding or freezing or something.
Yep.
Closed. So that's the closedness.
Yes, which means that our fundamental posture related to change is not open. Mm-hmm. We're not open to change. So we're either trying to avoid change, which is certainly not open, or we're trying to manage change, which also is not open. Mm-hmm. And so this persistent, dynamic disequilibrium, like in Jenga, something is always changing. Every time one of those blocks is removed, something is changing. There is a disequilibrium that's been introduced.
So I find
it's not a much of a fun game to build a block and then we all just sit and look at it.
So, Tom, I think this is really important because I think with homeostasis that people misunderstand it sometimes. They think it's equilibrium.
It is not.
And it's not.
No.
It's actually a constant dynamic state of managing
in response to the internal and external changes to facilitate life not only surviving but thriving. I'm going to say that again. Homeostasis is the persistent and dynamic disequilibrium in response to internal and external changes to facilitate life not only surviving, but thriving. If you were to ask anyone, are you open to thriving? Yeah! Are you open to change? Not so sure. Which change are you talking about? What kind of change are you talking about? How big a change are you talking about? But open to thriving is open to change. Not open to change is not even sure of surviving.
And what we know about homeostasis has been defined as life. It is life and a sense of well-being.
Yep. As Scott Turner said, homeostasis is life.
Okay. So for what the dynamic condition of homeostasis is this, it's change. It's the changes that are constantly occurring. Like if we take homeostasis, even in our bodies, what's happening is that this dynamic condition is constantly making adjustments to change all the time. And we need that for life and we need that for well-being. And so if we think about that, like change in that way, where actually without the changes, without the changes even in my season for a year as a parent, even though they might feel like, oh no, this feels overwhelming or whatever, without them, there isn't life and well-being.
Right.
And so it really kind of, it changes it absolutely changes our relationship with change if we view it like that.
Yes.
Now it's not to say that it isn't overwhelming. It's not to say it isn't challenging. It's not to say change doesn't feel, the feeling of change can either be really exciting or it can be really daunting.
Yes.
So there's a spectrum there of what the impact of change that can happen. There's a spectrum of really positive to all the way down to feeling like, oh, this doesn't feel that great. However, the truth is that change, or either a big change or lots of mini changes, brings life.
Is life. And without that, it isn't life. It's called dead. So Walter Cannon, who created the term homeostasis, said the coordinated physiological processes which maintain most of the steady states in the organism. That's why it's confused with equilibrium. Homeostasis is not equilibrium. Yeah. It's a steady state, which is not equilibrium. It's a steady state. The coordinated physiological processes which maintain most of the steady states in the organisms are so complex and peculiar to living beings, involving as they may the brain and nerves, the heart, lung, kidneys, and spleen, all working cooperatively, that I have suggested a special designation for these states: homeostasis. The word does not imply something set and immobile. That's what equilibrium is. It's something set. That's the nature. The word does not imply something set and immobile, a stagnation. It means a condition which may vary, but is relatively constant. So even as that Jenga tower is being changed with the removal of all those blocks, it still stays up. Now you remove too many of them, Too much change, that causes things to crumble. But no change is like building the tower and looking at it. Oh, we're having fun now. Bored. No, change is life. So change, I hope we've gotten across, is something to be open to. And not something to be avoided, and certainly not something to try to manage. Because when we are trying to avoid or manage, we are inevitably putting ourselves into a position of feeling insecure and inadequate. And when we are unable to avoid or manage, we may feel powerless, and then it becomes a control issue. Or with rational intimacy, which is why we feel secure and capable, and change helps us feel secure and capable. Then we are empowered, and we want to take a posture related to change to be influential.
And that's the awesome part, I think, of being open to change, is that, the way you're interacting with change is that you're actually very influential within that space.
Oh, absolutely. Always. It's just how influential, and in what ways am I influencing it? By avoiding it, I'm influential, but not in a positive way. By trying to manage it, I'm influential, but again, not in a positive way. Because then I'm not open to change itself.
And I wonder as well, like, whether one of the reasons why people can feel like it's a threat is because it can feel like change can feel like it's happening to you, or you're out of control, those types of feelings, And so, but the irony of it is, to be closed to change is like you are more out of control, because the change is going to happen.
It is. Yes.
Whether we are open or closed. And so being open is this really positive posture where we actually get it, interplay with it, to influence it. Whereas to be closed or try and manage it, it actually is, you're worse off. Even though you think you're trying to, be in control, you're actually far less in control than if you're open to change.
Yep.
Where you can go, okay, this is, there's change afoot right now. And that can be in on my life, that can be on a relationship level, that could be as a human being right now with some of the global challenges of the environment. That's one thing. It's like, are we open to change, or are we closed? Being open means I'm a human being that isn't, I'm not going to necessarily have to change my mind on everything, but I'm open to the change afoot. And that means that I get to be influential within it. And I think that is very empowering position to be in. Yes.
Now we get into the nature of change and the type of change.
Yes.
So there's change. We've established that if life is change. But there are two different types of change. There's what's called first order change and second order change. First order change is making incremental changes or modifications, doing more or less of the same thing while staying within an existing system. That's first order change. Second order change. So with second order change, that's generally understood as being transformational and revolutionary in nature. Seeing and doing something in a completely different manner. Second order change reestablishes, the way I've put it, is that second order change reestablishes homeostatic conditions in a way that transforms the intervention change system itself. The reason that so much of existing health interventions are only effective to a point, but not transformational, is because they are first order change.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing the same thing in more or less the same way and making incremental changes. When it comes to a lack of health and well-being, and I'm not talking just physiological, I'm talking about mental, I'm talking about relational, I'm talking about emotional well-being, which is what homeostasis is, there are times when it is necessary for there to be a transformational and revolutionary change. Because there's only so much you can do to make incremental changes that don't fundamentally change the system. It's like living in a home that is a Jenga tower, and you can make all the incremental changes, but eventually the thing's gonna collapse.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a revolutionary and transformational second order change to that house itself.
That's so good. And so the question is, well, that, you know, with, are we open to change, but are we open to second order change?
There it is.
Because there's a lot of people who will be open to first order change, possibly, but there's a whole other ball game to be open to second order change, which is to, I guess it's rethinking the system, it's diagnosing the disease, it's the getting to the root of what is actually healthy or not healthy. Mm-hmm. And the first order change, you know, it's the Band-Aid. It's the, okay, well, you've got a cut. Let's put a Band-Aid over that. But, or, you know, it's the superficial treating the symptoms of something and not actually getting to the root, treating the root disease.
Yep.
And that's obviously not just in health, but in organizations and systems and our own lives, and the way we think, the way we're treating the planet. I mean, it could be applied to any space. But are we open to second order change? I think is such a poignant question, Tom. And my goodness me, I feel like if we could, as a race, human race, get there and be open, be people who are like, yeah, we're going to be influential in that level of change, then that's incredibly envisioning to me.
Yeah. So there are times where change in the first order, making incremental adjustments and that sort of thing, is called for. And that's an appropriate type of change.
Yeah, so it's not a bad thing. Yeah,
no, it's just that appropriate to this circumstance, this setting. It's like I'm in traffic and I'm making incremental changes. But at some point, if there is gridlock, I find a new road. I get off this road. I don't sit in the middle of it. I find a new path. Because that's what's necessary. And it's an openness to first or second order change, whichever is appropriate. That means we just don't sit in the gridlock and stagnate.
And just keep doing the same thing, even though we know that it's not getting us anywhere.
Yep. Yes. So there's open to change. And then there's the question of what type of change. Is this a moment for a first order change? Or is this a second order change? Am I going to make incremental adjustments to keep my car safe in the flow of traffic, going a little slower, a little faster, changing a lane, changing back? Or do I just get off the road and I get onto an entirely new journey?
So what does it take? I'm curious, what does it take? Like, because when you think about first order change, you know, it feels like that's more adjusting. That's more like, I would imagine it's being open, it's being more like flexible, being that type of thing, you know, to be able to be open to that type of change. It's like my kids' summer. It's like, you know, I'm making adjustments. I am not changing what I'm doing. I'm still doing this podcast. I'm still studying my
Mm-hmm.
MBA. I'm still a leadership coach. But during those 3 months, I'm going to be adjusting slightly to accommodate that change. But so I think for me, when I think about the attributes that are needed to be open, are flexibility and, that type of thing. But for second order change, what is needed? Like, what is needed in us to be people who are open to that? Like, is there a difference, or what is that?
Absolutely. I think one, it's a willingness to risk in a healthy way, identifying no matter how many incremental changes I make, this doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that? It's the sense of, am I surviving or am I thriving? Am I alive or am I living? And if I don't have that sense of being living and thriving, try the first order changes and be open to that.
Mm-hmm.
But if those don't work, then it's time for something revolutionary and transformational.
Mm-hmm.
It's time for a second order change.
And so that takes, and I think that's helpful because it is, like, so first order change can work in certain situations. So there's discernment, isn't there, in those spaces? And I do think that, even as we're looking at some of the global challenges that we're facing in terms of the environment right now, and just some of the innovation that's coming out, like with fuel and all sorts of stuff, a lot of it is that second order change that's happening, where for decades we've been doing the tweaks, we've been trying to make it better, but I think people are going, actually, this doesn't work. Mm-hmm. We need to overhaul the way we're even thinking about products or buying things, or circular economy. All of that stuff is second order change. Mm-hmm. And but then you could also have that in terms of a family system, or
or a career.
Like, you just keep making the changes, but at some point you think, actually, this is not working. And so, but it takes, it's a much bigger, braver, courageous move, right? For second order change, to be open to that.
Yes.
But it can be incredibly life-giving to embrace a second order change, where you've been stuck in a system that no matter what you're doing, maybe it makes it slightly better, but it's kind of broken from the outset. To be able to move from that to a new paradigm that works, that is going to give you life, that is going to set you on a trajectory. It will demand risk. You need to be courageous, because it's like a lot more, but it's like hugely beneficial and life-giving.
So nature itself exists this way. If you think about it, the seasons that change, they transition from one to another. It's not an abrupt, it's 0 degrees in winter, and now it's 90 degrees and it's summer. The seasons themselves change. But if you think about the overall picture, there is a revolutionary and transformational difference between the dead of winter and the height of summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are revolutionary. They happen gradually. So I think that being open to change is navigating the transitions so that we're always in season.
Yeah.
That's thriving.
Yeah, that's really good. I've never thought of it like that. And there is this, I think, also with change as well. It's it's just things are evolving, right? With the seasons, that it's like you lose. I always think with the seasons, it's hilarious because like summer happens. And then by the end of summer, we're so over the heat, right? And,
exactly.
But then and we're longing for, like, by the summer, I'm longing for those gorgeous colours of fall. I am like longing for the little trips
cool in the air.
Yeah, all of that. And then, but then,
in the dead of winter, getting to have like fires and not sweating, and I can't get enough clothes off because it's 100 degrees outside, and I've got the air conditioning going. But in the dead of winter, a cozy fire, wrapping up in a snug. Lovely. Oh, that's lovely too. Thriving.
But the point is, actually, if it was only one ever, it would lose the joy. It would lose the life. It would lose the specialness of that season. And so we all know that. We all go through those things right now. As we've mentioned, my kids are entering in summer. We're excited for summer. We're like, the pool's going to be open. You know, you can drive around, and you've got a nice car you can take the roof off, and so there's this excitement about summer. So I think that's the point of change. But it's, if we see change as a threat where we're losing something, right? So it's a very negative way of like, oh no, change is happening, but I'm worried that I'm going to lose this thing that is my current situation, which I think is a core of why a lot of people see it as a threat, threat. But instead, if we can shift, instead of seeing, you will lose something, like when you come out of summer into fall, you will lose summer for a while to go, but you're going to gain
It'll come back.
Something different. And so I think for me, it's about not worrying about losing. It's not losing something. It's just almost, it's like partnering with this awesome journey that gives you variety, life, new opportunities, new experiences, and everything's just evolving. So nothing's actually lost. I think if we get that, if we hold on to that, are things lost? Like you were saying in our pre-conversation, just in terms of, even in the way that, water changes into
energy is never lost. It just changes form.
Exactly. Yeah.
And without change, there's no transformation.
And so I think the reason why I say that is just to try and get underneath the fear, because I think there is fear around change, and I understand it. I think, even with my kids, we've talked about them in this episode a bit, but just, they're going into teenage land right now, which is going to be a whole thing. And sometimes, I can look at my photos of when they were babies and I'm like, oh, like any parent would, just like, oh, and if I think I've lost that time, that could make me not enjoy the moments now. But if instead of seeing it like that, just seeing it as this is this wild journey that I get to go on with my kids, nothing's lost. It's all evolving from one, like it's like energy from going from one stage to the next, one
form to another.
I'm going to be open to that. I'm going to be present and open and influential in those spaces. That's a really different frame of mind, just in that one.
Dare I say, makes one open to change.
There you go. Open to change. Well, I've loved this conversation. I hope it's given our listeners some handles on the concepts around change, why we should be open to it, why that really positions us into a place of thriving. And also, I think the discernment there of first order change and second order change is so key in the place we find ourselves in. So thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Let's thrive, not just survive. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.